My name is Lily Rossi, and for my final project, I will be presenting my diagnosis of Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Miller Hemingway was born in Oak Park, Illinois, on July 21, 1899. His father, Clarence Hemingway, was a family doctor, and his mother, Grace, was a music teacher. Ernest was the second of 6 children. He was preceded in birth by his older sister Marceline and followed by 3 younger sisters, Ursula, Madeline, and Carol, as well as his younger brother Lester. Hemingway spent much of his childhood summers at his family's vacation house on Michigan's Walloon Lake. There, Clarence taught Ernest how to hunt and fish, fostering his love and appreciation of nature. Even as he grew older, Hemingway's love for hunting and fishing never waned. Throughout his life, these childhood pastimes continued to be among his favorite activities, demonstrating the lasting influence of his early years. These experiences offered an abundance of material that later influenced Hemingway's literary career. Hemingway did not have a positive relationship with either of his parents. For example, despite their shared love of the outdoors, Hemingway had a troublesome relationship with his father. Clarence Hemingway was a strict and violent disciplinarian who physically abused Ernest. In addition, Clarence experienced severe and erratic mood swings, marked by states of depression and irritability. Ernest and his siblings noted the strain that their father's unstable condition caused them throughout their childhood. Due to his mood swings, Clarence took frequent trips away from the family in an effort to treat and reduce his symptoms. During a depressive episode in December 1928, Clarence Hemingway committed suicide. Ernest also had a strained relationship with his mother. As a child, Ernest received heavy feminine influence from his mother, who insisted on dressing him like a girl, going beyond the typical practice of boys wearing dresses during the Victorian era. At their summer home, Ernest wore typical hunting attire and was not feminized by his mother. Grace praised her son for his masculine traits and outdoor abilities. Many biographers note that these gender inconsistencies imposed by his mother may have confused the young Hemingway and influenced his later preference for masculine traits and actions, as well as his challenges with women. Throughout his life, Hemingway held resentment for his mother and often described her as a domineering and self-serving person. Hemingway blamed his mother for his father's suicide and maintained that belief for the rest of his life. In addition to his father's mood disturbances and suicide, Hemingway's siblings also experienced mental health concerns. For example, his older sister experienced depressive episodes, and both his younger siblings, Lester and Ursula, committed suicide, illustrating the family's history of mental illness. Hemingway succeeded both academically and athletically in high school. He showed a special gift for writing and wrote for the yearbook and newspaper at his high school. Hemingway's earliest writings were published within the Oak Park public school system. In 1917, Hemingway graduated from Oak Park and River Forest High School. After high school, Hemingway decided not to attend college. Instead, he became a reporter for the Kansas City Star. Even though he only worked there for 6 months, Hemingway's writing style was greatly impacted by his time working at the newspaper. The newspaper's style guide influenced him to write in concise, declarative sentences, which eventually became a defining attribute of his literary style. Seeking adventure, and an escape from his home life, Hemingway joined the Red Cross Medical Service in the summer of 1918. After joining, he was sent to Italy to work as an ambulance driver at age 18. In that role, he witnessed the destruction and devastation of war. While serving in Italy, Hemingway was seriously injured. While recovering, he spent time writing and falling in love with his nurse. The rejection from the nurse he fell in love with prompted a depressive episode, which later became a defining characteristic of his life. Afterward, Hemingway joined the Italian army and continued to serve there before returning to America in 1919. After his return to the United States, Hemingway started a career as a journalist. He worked for the Toronto Star, where he reported on conflicts including the Spanish Civil War and the Greco-Turkish War. Hemingway's military and journalistic experiences influenced his outlook on life and contributed to the themes of masculinity, war, and survival seen in much of his work. In 1921, while he was working as a journalist, Hemingway married his first wife, Hadley Richardson. The couple relocated to Paris so Hemingway could work and concentrate on writing fiction. During this period, Hemingway's career began to prosper. In Paris, Hemingway became a member of the Lost Generation, a group of writers and artists who were living abroad, such as F. Scott Fitzgerald and Gertrude Stein. This period strongly influenced Hemingway and inspired a number of his early writings. While in Paris, Hemingway wrote his 1926 novel The Sun Also Rises. It was his first major success. This book established Hemingway as a literary figure and also introduced his simple and to-the-point writing style, which is often called the iceberg theory, where readers have to infer deeper meanings. Hemingway's passion for the outdoors and his spirit of adventure carried him on global travels throughout his life, which significantly impacted his writing. He was exposed to the reality of warfare while driving ambulances and working as a foreign correspondent, which shaped his views on bravery and honor, as demonstrated in his 1929 novel, A Farewell to Arms. In addition, his other adventures, which included deep-sea fishing in Cuba, safaris in Africa, and bullfighting in Spain, were more than just recreational activities, as they also inspired some of his most iconic works. His well-known novel, The Old Man and the Sea, won Hemingway the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1953. Later, in 1954, Hemingway was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature for his literary contributions. Hemingway's personal life was characterized by multiple complicated relationships. For instance, Ernest Hemingway was married 4 times. In 1921, he married Elizabeth Hadley Richardson, who became his first wife. The couple had 1 son, John Hemingway. During his first marriage, Hemingway had an affair with Pauline Pfeiffer. Hadley Richardson filed for divorce after learning of the affair. After his first divorce, Hemingway married Pauline Pfeiffer in 1927. They had 2 sons, Patrick and Gregory. In 1940, Hemingway filed for divorce from Pauline due to his infidelity and relationship with Martha Gellhorn. Shortly after his second divorce, Hemingway married Martha in 1940. However, she had an affair with an American paratrooper during their marriage, and they divorced in 1945. In 1946, Mary Welsh became Hemingway's fourth and final wife. The couple stayed married until Hemingway's death. Hemingway's last years were characterized by both emotional and physical distress. At age 60, Hemingway battled depression, suicidal ideations, hypertension, and the various ramifications of years of heavy drinking. Along with his depressive symptoms and suicidal thoughts, Hemingway experienced paranoid delusions. He grew increasingly concerned that the FBI was observing him and that his friends were planning to kill him. Hemingway was admitted to the Mayo Clinic in November of 1960 to receive medical attention for his physical and psychological symptoms, such as high blood pressure, liver disease, and declining mental health. While there, he received electroshock therapy for his depression. Hemingway spent 2 months at the Mayo Clinic, and upon returning home, his depression worsened after realizing his inability to write. Hemingway attempted suicide 3 times before returning to the Mayo Clinic and receiving additional shock treatments. He persuaded his doctors that he was well enough to return home, despite his wife's objections. Shortly after being released from the hospital for the second time, Hemingway committed suicide on July 2, 1961. By examining Hemingway's life, a case can be made regarding his possible mental health conditions. Considering the complexities of his life, I chose to give Hemingway a primary and secondary diagnosis. Many of Hemingway's experiences and behaviors align with the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria for bipolar I disorder. To begin, Hemingway exhibited abnormal mood states throughout his life, including episodes of depression and periods of elevated moods. For example, the first significant biographer of Hemingway noted the author's extreme mood swings and even used the term manic depressive when describing Hemingway. The biographer observed that Hemingway frequently discussed suicide in letters and in conversations. It was also noted that Hemingway's erratic behavior and strained interpersonal connections were associated with these mood swings. Another biographer later noted that Hemingway's emotions fluctuated so quickly between low and high that it was almost as if he was both manic and depressed at the same time. In addition to mood fluctuations, Hemingway exhibited other symptoms commonly associated with bipolar disorder. These symptoms include psychotic features such as paranoid delusions. Hemingway experienced several symptoms that meet the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria for a manic episode. Numerous biographies emphasize Hemingway's experiences with periods of increased energy and elevated moods, citing times in his youth when he would stay awake through the night, drinking, loudly reading poems, and writing in mass quantities. These periods of heightened energy and activity were characterized by increased and rapid goal-directed behavior, heightened self-esteem and grandiosity, a decreased need for sleep, and racing thoughts, as demonstrated through his actions of staying up all night and producing a large number of stories in a short period of time. His inflated self-esteem can also be seen in his preference to boast and brag about his works and abilities. In 1924, Hemingway's first wife found him in an elevated state and noted that she had to send him on a trip for alone time because his behavior during this period was intolerable. Similarly, during these periods, Hemingway's inflated self-esteem interfered with his friendships. Looking back at his family history and childhood, Ernest had started to experience the same mood swings that had driven his father away from the family. In addition, Hemingway also experienced several symptoms that meet the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria for a major depressive episode. As previously mentioned, there is a long history of depression and suicide within Hemingway's family, and he himself experienced many depressive episodes throughout his life. Numerous biographies cite Hemingway's letters to friends and family, which detail and describe his experience of depression. Within these letters, through personal communications with friends, as well as in his fictional writings, Hemingway outlines diagnostic criteria for a major depressive episode. That is, Hemingway acknowledges symptoms of a diminished sex drive, a loss of interest and pleasure, feelings of emptiness, persistent thoughts of suicide and death, and an inability to sleep. Moreover, Hemingway's depression interfered with his ability to write, since he could not express his thoughts with words, which, in turn, diminished his self-worth. A second plausible DSM-5 diagnosis for Hemingway is alcohol use disorder. Hemingway was a lifelong drinker, and I believe that his alcohol use worsened the symptoms of his mood disorder. Hemingway began drinking on a daily basis in the early 1920s after his first marriage ended. His drinking increased as his relationship with his mother deteriorated and his father committed suicide. Hemingway's life contained several risk factors for developing alcohol use disorder. These include his dysfunctional family circumstances, as well as the environmental and social context associated with his lifestyle. For example, he was a famous author who traveled often and frequently found himself in situations where it was common to drink. Hemingway also exhibited attributes related to substance use disorders. For instance, he used alcohol to enhance his social interactions with others and also increase his enjoyment. Further, Hemingway also used alcohol as a coping mechanism as he engaged in drinking in order to forget his hardships. These are two behaviors that suggest the occurrence of problem drinking and alcoholism. In addition, Hemingway also experienced the physical side effects associated with alcohol use disorder, such as liver problems and high blood pressure. Moreover, Hemingway faced the social consequences of alcohol use disorder, such as frequent marital arguments and strained relationships. As previously stated, Hemingway was a lifelong drinker. He began drinking consistently at a young age, and his drinking increased while he was going through difficult times in his life, such as when relationships were failing and when he experienced other stressful events. Despite several warnings concerning his alcohol usage from loved ones and from doctors stating that it was damaging his health, Hemingway was unable to stop drinking. Hemingway's excessive drinking also caused conflicts in many of his relationships, leading to some of his divorces. Hemingway had been concerned about his drinking for years and had made efforts to reduce his alcohol intake, but he was never able to maintain sobriety for an extended length of time. Hemingway experienced multiple incidents of alcohol-related injuries and accidents, which demonstrated alcohol's adverse effects on his life and well-being, as well as his dependency since he kept drinking despite the many negative consequences. Many of his head injuries occurred during times when Hemingway was intoxicated. The typical interpersonal, physical, and emotional problems associated with alcohol use disorder interfered with many aspects of Hemingway's life, as well as potentially worsened his mood disorder. Hemingway expressed his strong desire to drink and his dependence on alcohol, as well as its adverse effects on his life through his personal writings to friends and family. By looking at Hemingway's life, several risk factors that may have influenced the development of his mental health disorders can be seen. For example, due to a combination of biological, psychological, and environmental factors, Hemingway had a predisposition for mental health issues, increasing his vulnerability and ultimately influencing his suicide. For example, there was a history of mental illness and suicide within the Hemingway family. As previously mentioned, Hemingway's father exhibited symptoms of a mood disorder and died by suicide. Furthermore, Hemingway's older sister experienced episodes of depression, and two of his younger siblings also took their own lives. In addition, Gregory, the youngest son of Hemingway, experienced substance use issues and was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. According to the DSM-5, One of the most significant risk factors for bipolar disorder is a family history of the condition. In addition to a family history of mental illness, Hemingway also endured emotional and physical childhood abuse. He had resentment towards both of his parents since his mother had given him confusing messages about gender and self-worth, and his father had abused him. His childhood experiences may have resulted in identity confusion, persistent suicidal thoughts, difficulties with intimate relationships, and vulnerability, as seen through his many failed marriages. These internalized issues complicated his personal life and may have prevented him from developing long-lasting, meaningful relationships and social support systems. Moreover, Hemingway's chronic use of alcohol as a defense mechanism for his hardships led to substance dependence, as well as increased his risk for depression and aggravated his mood disturbances. It is also possible that the numerous brain injuries that Hemingway acquired throughout his global adventures added to his depression and further destabilized his mood disorder. Finally, Hemingway lived in a period where treatment options were limited and the stigma surrounding mental illness was much greater compared to today. This lack of options and stigma prevented Hemingway from getting the help he needed. For example, in 1960, when Hemingway's depression and suicidal thoughts worsened, he was urged to seek treatment. However, Hemingway resisted, stating that he did not want to be labeled as crazy.